watching Politics Unscripted, the segment of the show, the debate uncensored. Now, after the local government elections, the votes from the EFF, for example, and ActionSA councillors saw the DA take mayoral positions in key councils like Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni. So, what does this mean for our politics and the cooperation of the future of these coalitions? Let's introduce now our panel, and Asanda Ngoasheng joins us via the virtual platform. She's a political analyst. We have also another political analyst, Mr. Sandile Swana, who joins us on the virtual platform. We have Dr. Harlan Cloete. He is from the School of Public Leadership at the University of Stellenbosch. And we also have in studio here Lesego Mosweu, who is you are from the School of Public Leadership at the University of Johannesburg. No, actually, you are the
Department of Politics
and International Relations at the University
of Johannesburg.
Yes. All right, got that. Perfect. All right, let's actually start here in studio with you. Your thoughts on the biggest challenges that face these coalitions that we saw being formed in the last week. Your thoughts on that?
I think the biggest challenge has been what previously Professor Friedman had mentioned about the sort of deceit that's underlying in our politics as a landscape. You know, politicians will say the one thing but do the other. For example, with Helen Zille, mentioned proudly, publicly saying that they will never take the EFF's deal to say that if the EFF makes an offer to offer them that they should vote with the EFF to put the NC out of power. Yeah. She said no, the DA denied that agreement, right? But we saw in Thembelihle municipality in the Northern Cape where the DA voted for an EFF mayor. So with the coalitions also thinking of the ANC being thrown out of power in Johannesburg as well as Ekurhuleni. We don't know what to anticipate. We don't know how to think and think about the 2024 elections because there's a lot of uncertainty underlying these elections and the coalitions.
And I like how you end your assessment of what is what's going on right now, and that is the uncertainty. That seems to be an appropriate word. Asanda Ngoasheng, let's come to you also. Your assessment of what you think is the biggest challenge facing the coalition governments that we saw being formed in the past week.
I think the biggest challenge is getting them to agree with each other because, as I've said before, one of the biggest issues we have is that you have a coalition by agreement, by verbal agreement technically, because they haven't worked out the rules of engagement. They don't have clear kind of understandings of under which circumstances the DA, who has gotten a lot of the backing, will make decisions without necessarily, talking to their coalition partners. They don't have, details around what constitutes a quorum. So the number of people required to make an agreement as a grouping of political parties and many other details that are required when you are going to form a government of unity of sorts. And I think that, the biggest thing is that do coalition governments work? Yes, they work. We've seen them work elsewhere. And in fact, even in South Africa, you can say to a certain extent, the first post-94 kind of government was some sort of government of coalition. However, there are no clear rules that determine these current, coalitions that we've just gone into. And then secondly, we have a 5-year history of destabilization seen in Gauteng, seen in Nelson Mandela Bay because of coalitions that couldn't hold to the 5-year line. And so for me, the concern is how are they going to make it work? Will they get to sit down and actually write some kind of rules of engagement and have more detail to what they're calling an agreement? Because that is where, that's the crux of whether the coalition is going to hold or not. And then the second thing is, how is the ANC going to respond? Because as I said before, the ANC still has the biggest united voting bloc. And although they may not have the majority, they are competing with people who are divided ideologically.
Yeah.
And in terms of political strategy. If you listen to what the previous speaker said, they're talking about how, the DA was saying they're not going to do this and they did. ActionSA was saying they're not going to do this and they did. EFF was saying they're not going to do this and they did. And so the voters really have been kind of on a ping pong situation, watching and going back and forth between these political parties trying to figure out what's going to happen. But for me, what's really interesting and what I'm really keen to see is how provincial government is going to fare. Because you now have a provincial government that is majority. In most places, it's ANC. And then in the Western Cape, of course, it's the DA.
Yeah.
You have a majority government in provinces, that is ANC. But you have municipalities which are, I would even argue in some stages, sort of still hung, right? With a multiplicity of political parties that have come together with sticky stape, as I've said before as well, who are now supposedly in government.
Yeah.
And then you are going to have, this provincial government called the ANC running the province, and this unsure, unstable coalition running municipalities. How is this going to work?
Yeah.
Is the ANC going to do something to try and destabilize these coalitions further? There's 5 years.
Yeah.
They probably will, and they probably might just succeed. And so I think that we need to start asking very difficult questions about the details of these coalitions and move beyond just celebrating that the ANC is finally out of power, or at the very least that the power that they used to have is very much diluted, and start to ask these questions, because that is what is going to determine the reality on the ground in terms of, will we get service delivery? Is this so-called, quorum by opposition parties going to be in the best interest of South Africans? And will these opposition parties, more importantly, survive in 2024, considering some of what they have done in the name of removing the ANC?
All right.
Because not every voter is going to be happy with some of the decisions that they've made ideologically, that is.
Asanda Ngoasheng, going very, very deep into the discussion. Some of what you mentioned is actually what I'm going to be asking all of you about. Let's come to you, Dr. Cloete. These are merely verbal agreements. There is nothing that's been formalized. Your thoughts on the biggest test facing these coalitions formed in the past week?
I think, look, thank you very much, and good afternoon to your listeners, your viewers. I think it's early days for coalitions to work, like my colleagues have said. Parties should have a set of common values and a common set of principles and beliefs. And I think the problem in the past with coalitions is that it also destabilizes the administration. So for a municipality to work effectively, it needs stable, strong political leadership, and it needs a stable, strong administrative leadership that can make sure that the ship continues to sail. Or like a colleague of mine said, it's 2 tracks, as the community is the train and the political and the admin interface. And so one really hopes that it will bring some sort of a stability, so that, because normally one party comes in and they kick out the municipal manager and his directors, and that really destabilizes the institution. Yeah. So for local government to work, it needs a strong political admin interface that is stable. If that is not stable, it puts the whole exercise at risk, because, electing mayors and office bearers is but one thing. We now go into the IDP, we now go into passing of budgets, we now go into appointment of staff, and all of those, if that terrain if there are blurred lines there, that is where the cookie normally, crumbles, where things fall apart and the center doesn't hold.
Yeah. Mr. Swana, you get to have the last word on how these coalition governments are going to work, but starting with what you think is the biggest test for them so far.
Yes, my thinking is, first of all, this question of saying let's vote the ANC out to the where we perhaps think that they were saying, let's vote the political party ANC out. But I think there were certain practices they said they want to remove from the municipal sector. As an example, the ANC is an emblem of corruption. It would be an emblem of incompetence, both among the councillors and the staff, the administrative staff, as well as continuous poor performance. So in saying that you are voting the ANC out, you are then saying, regardless of whether it was the ANC or anybody else, this is what we are voting up, this type of belief and practice. So that would be, to me, the starting point. The second issue is that a lot of them, if they wanted to be able to work together properly, the duties of the municipalities are actually written down in Section 152 of the Constitution and various sections of the Municipal Systems Act and the MFMA. So that would be a good starting point to demarcate as to what it is that when we're talking about municipal services, we're talking about in the first place, so that we don't have outlandish suggestions that come up.
Yeah.
And another source of guidance are the many MFMA Auditor General's report that have actually shown the shortcomings and the previous IDPs that already highlight the shortcomings in delivery, the backlogs. For instance, in reading the IDP at one point of Johannesburg, that the potholes in Johannesburg, the length of road would be from Joburg to Mombasa if you were to look at the road that needs to be fixed in terms of potholes and bridges and so on. So I think that once they shift from the broader ideological issues to the technical and concrete issues on the ground, it should be quite possible to find common ground for them to work properly.
All right. Well, let's pause there for a moment, because when we return, we're going to focus the attention on either of these coalition agreements, whether you talk the DA-led coalitions that have taken place mostly here in Gauteng, and you then go to KZN and Nelson Mandela Bay there, the ANC seemingly leading those coalition governments. Just how stable are they, and what will be the give and take? We continue in a moment. You're watching Politics Unscripted, the segment of the show. It is the debate uncensored, and we are talking about the coalition governments that have been formed in the past week. Just how stable are they? Let's pick up in studio here, and we have Lesego Mosweu from the Department of Politics within the University of Johannesburg. I want to pick up on the DA-led coalitions in Gauteng specifically, and some people holding the strong view that there are two difficult realities that the DA faces here, and that is to give in to demands that are going to be made, particularly from parties like the EFF. The DA, remember, had made it very clear that it is not interested in going into a coalition with the EFF, and none exists, by the way, except that the EFF has decided to throw its votes or donate its votes to DA councillors and making them mayor. The other option, people are saying, is that failure to give in to these demands, whether it be the EFF or ActionSA, you're going to see a collapse of these councils. Which of these two options for you is the likely one?
I think it needs to really consider giving into the demands and seeing where they can have common ground. All the parties that are involved in this, and see whether or not they can make the coalition work. If, you know, at the end of the day, they might decide that they want to go into a coalition, despite the DA saying that they would want to be go into a coalition with the EFF. But I think that they really need to have a common ground, especially if the main goal is to say that they want to keep the dominant party out of power.
Yeah.
And if now the chase, the main goal, I think, for many smaller parties is to say that they want to prove to the broader communities that they are capable and reliable of taking, the seats and leading South Africans. So I think the second option, rather, is where I stand.
Yeah, okay. Asanda Ngoasheng, let's bring you back in. Your thoughts on what is going to sustain the coalitions that are led by the DA in Gauteng? Is it going to have to make concessions to the EFF and ActionSA in particular? And if it fails to do so, how close are we to those by-elections?
I think we're very close to the by-elections, because I think if we look at past history, the EFF has said that they have a 7-point plan or very specific things that they want to happen. We know ActionSA also has very specific things that they promised the voters, like tough laws on immigration and various other things that they have decided are their focus points. And so we've got two political parties that have clear and specific mandates that they have been given by the voters who voted for them, who are now in a coalition of minorities. And I think that the DA is not likely to be able to concede to some of the demands, even if they wanted to, purely on one basis. Ideologically, the Democratic Alliance and the EFF are literally poles apart, right? And you are going to have a Julius Malema who's probably going to make demands like issues of land. And we do know that, the municipality does have some level of decision-making around allocation of land, particularly in, districts, etc., etc. Yeah. And we do know that municipalities have some powers around deciding some of the bylaws, around deciding some of the issues that both ActionSA and the EFF have prioritized. And so
Asanda,
they're going to have to make...
Hang on a minute. Let me interrupt you. And I'm doing it purposefully because you're saying that the EFF is probably going to make some of these demands. But where does that even start when Julius Malema says on Thursday at a media briefing that we're not interested in talking to the DA for the next 5 years? And so if Herman Mashaba says, sure, we are going to go into discussions with the DA, he might as well go there by himself, and he seems to know our views or represent our views very well. And so that's the starting point here, that it just does not look like any of these things are going to get off the mark.
I think that it would be very naive to think that a Julius Malema is really going to hand over all of his power to Herman Mashaba without trying to have any influence. The very point of them backing Herman Mashaba is in itself a political strategy to ensure that they get the kind of influence that they want, because they see the numbers that Herman Mashaba has been able to get, and they already have an established relationship with Herman Mashaba when he was in the DA. And so I think Julius Malema can say many things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's going to happen. I think politics, if you remember, what is politics? It's a fight for scarce resources, right?
Sure.
And so this is a game of influence, and we can't pretend to be naive enough to actually believe that the EFF is not going to have any demands on the DA. They may have demands via ActionSA,
yeah,
but there definitely are going to be demands coming from the EFF, whether they branded ActionSA or EFF.
Very interesting indeed. Dr. Cloete, let's come to you. Asanda alluded to this point a little earlier. Now, if you have a situation where a budget can't be passed because there is no agreement about the way forward, there's a time limit to this, and it might see the municipality basically folding. What role then does the ANC play, particularly in Gauteng? Because remember, the ANC is still, it rules the roost provincially. What role does it play at a provincial government level? Because it has the power to monitor or oversee the running of municipalities in the province.
Look, the province has got a very defined role to play as per the constitution. They must help and support local government. That is their role. So they can't be politicking with this. And that is what happened, you would remember, in the Tshwane municipality, where the Tshwane municipality was placed under administration. That decision was found to be wrong by the Constitutional Court, and they had to be reversed. And so, I'm on record as saying, I think there are two options. The South African voter couldn't care less, I think, who rules. People want the objectives. Clean street, safety. Politics is in the interest of the politicians. The South Africans are tired of politics.
Yeah.
I think that is what we've seen now. And so under the best system, I think, there are two options that municipalities have. And in the Free State, we saw the MEC issuing a Section 12 notice to a municipality to say, this winner-take-all mayoral executive system, we're going to replace it with a collective executive system. Now, the collective executive system says in the executive, the parties will then be proportionally represented. And so I believe that where there is no outright winner, like these hung councils, the most stable way to do it would be through the collective executive system, which forces people, the political parties, to work together, to compromise, to find wise compromise to make sure that we take the town forward.
Yeah.
You can imagine how young people will lose confidence because the experience of politics now is that people can't get the work done. They're more interested in fighting over positions, about what is in their best interest, and not acting in the interest of the community.
Sure.
And so South Africans deserve stable local government where people don't steal, where there is a commitment to appoint the best people locally, if they can't find them locally, provincially, to be able to run the administration of a municipality. Because look, politicians have got oversight responsibility. We need, the last Aegis report says that we do not have ethical and accountable leadership at the till. And so those are the things that bothers ordinary South Africans.
Yeah.
They are losing confidence in local government, and politicians, they are sick and tired of the grandstanding of politicians and these games. Now I say I'm going to support you, now I'm not going to support you. This cat and mouse business, it just doesn't good hold to the entire body politic in South Africa. And so I believe the best system would be the collective executive system, where at the local level political parties compromise and get the town moving.
All right. So on that point, Mr. Swana, the expression political maturity has been used quite extensively during this period. If you look closely, which leader of a political party has demonstrated political maturity or vice versa? And who should voters punish should there be a total failure of governance?
I cannot identify who the best, the most mature leader, if you like, or the most mature party would be in this. But I think we also need to be a little bit harder on these political parties right now, which is that the record level of hung municipalities was in 2011. 2016, it's when it burst into the metros, the issue of hung municipalities. And then the record of 2011 was broken this year by the results of this year. Which then means that in the municipal sector, we've been having hung municipalities, certainly between 2011 and 2016. I don't think we had any dramas about this. But where it starts to develop dramas, as you've seen that in the Western Cape, as an example, all those small rural municipalities, the DA was very quick to cobble together coalitions. Yeah. My suspicion is that what we call the instability of municipal coalitions and municipalities has got nothing to do with anything else other than the desire for people to access municipal tenders and certain lucrative positions within municipalities, not the actual program of municipalities. And that is the issue that has got to be moderated.
Yeah.
And I agree with the view that the time now is for co-governance. The time for a winner-takes-all mentality is long gone. And the ANC itself recently, whether you're talking about the disruption in Durban of a properly constituted council meeting, physical disruption, in Caledon, a physical disruption, and elsewhere. So, people need to now start maturing and excluding tactics and methods in seeking to get positions that fall outside of our constitution and our laws. I have serious doubts that we're going to have debates about the content of the program, of what must be implemented. It is these selfish interests of positions of money and tenders that can cloud muddy the waters.
You see, and that very point you've just made, we're going to pick up on that when we return, because I was in eThekwini when that coalition was quickly cobbled together, and the use of the word money has exchanged hands, was used at that meeting, and we're going to pick up on exactly that, talking about eThekwini and the coalition that's been formed there, led by the African National Congress. We continue as we wrap up shortly after this. We're watching Politics Unscripted. We are discussing the coalition governments that have been formed. Just how stable are they? Or perhaps the question is, how close are we to by-elections if none of the parties concerned are able to manage these coalitions? And let's pick up with Lesego Mosweu in studio. Let's talk about eThekwini now. Mm-hmm. I was there, I covered that meeting, and the recurring theme, at least from those who were opposed to what became the result, and that is that the ANC, with the help of smaller parties, were able to take the city of Durban once again. However, there is this worry that in eThekwini, it has nothing to do with the delivery of services to people, but more to do with those who have been in charge in eThekwini continuing to be dominant, but in this instance, the allegation has been that they offered the parties that they're going to go into agreement with money so that they could vote with them. So, money versus the delivery of services. Which of these two should trump the day?
I think service delivery should be in the forefront, given that the ANC is steadily declining, right? The voter share of the ANC is steadily declining. So I think they should really focus on service delivery, given that their decline is giving space for the smaller parties to fill in the gap and win the trust of the electorate. So now, if they don't change the narrative and pick up themselves and deal with the factionalism, the accused factionalism that is happening within the ANC, they could see themselves losing or in the risk of losing come the next election.
Asanda Ngoasheng, the alleged involvement of the suspended ANC Secretary General, Ace Magashule, former President Jacob Zuma, former Health Minister Dr. Willem Kiza, in putting together this coalition that we saw emerge in eThekwini, how should we read that situation that unfolded there?
I mean, I think I'm not surprised, that we have these characters that are known to be politically influential in the ANC in KZN being brought in, because the ANC at this point is desperate. I mean, I don't know if you saw the Jesse Date video that had a kind of blowback or it kind of flashback to Nelson Mandela as portrait behind her. And it showed us that the ANC is really kind of a little bit numb and a little bit shocked by what has happened, because people have been telling the ANC that they are tired with, what has been mentioned before, the lack of clean governance and. And I think that, the ANC just wanted to save face and have at least one metro where they were not completely decimated in the ways that we have seen happen to them in most of the metros across the country. And so I'm not surprised that if it needed, bringing in the other RET faction to make this happen, that's what happened. But what it also does is it reveals to us as the voters, us as South Africans, that the ANC will always take care of the ANC, and the ANC will always be willing to scratch each other's backs and be willing to forgive, past misgivings. And that is exactly the problem that South Africans should have with the ANC, because they will always put the ANC and the politics of the ANC ahead of the interests of the country. And I think for me, what I also want to talk about just a little bit, moving away from the ANC in eThekwini, is that one of the concerns that I have with how things have turned out is that it has placed the DA in a lot of power, with a lot of executive mayors going to the DA. And I can tell you, as somebody who lives in Cape Town and has lived in Cape Town for almost 10 years, that if you live in Cape Town and you live in a suburb, life is good. They deliver. They do everything they're supposed to do. But if you live in a township, whether it's black or colored or Indian township, you do not know service delivery, because the ways in which they deliver for so-called white people and for the rich and the middle class people of South Africa is completely different to the way they deliver to the so-called working class and poor people and black people in the main in this here province. And I worry that people don't necessarily understand what this means and how this will translate in the metros where they have voted the DA in with executive powers. Because remember, when you have executive powers, there's still a lot that you can do without necessarily getting the vote of the people. And there's still a lot of power that you can wield, particularly with the tendering system in terms of deciding who gets to get which tenders. And I can tell you, being in the Western Cape again, that people are in for a very unpleasant surprise, because there's this kind of perception and belief that the DA delivers and will give you clean governance and will give you all of these things. But yes, it does, if you're white and you happen to have some money. And people in townships and people in poorer areas than the suburbs, where most white people in this country live, are going to see a shock. And that is going to yield some very interesting results for 2024. So let's not be shocked or surprised if people suddenly find themselves going back to the ANC or abstaining in even larger numbers. And I think that the South African project that we as all citizens should be concerned with is teaching people about democracy and the vote, and why it's important for as many South Africans as possible to go out there and vote and to make their voices heard, so that when we are making decisions like has happened now, the decisions are backed by the majority, by the biggest numbers of South Africans.
Those are such strong statements. Dr. Cloete, can I have you react to that, or do you agree with Asanda Ngoasheng?
Look, governance. It's one thing being opposition, and it's another thing to govern. I read Herman Mashaba's book the other day, and he said through midterm, through his coalition as the DA mayor, he got the feeling that some of the DA councillors were not interested in governing because it's so easy to be in opposition. So governing is an art in itself. I want to come back to the administration. Although the politicians have got oversight responsibility, the stability I want to emphasize is public administration requires stable and competent officials. And that officials should be constitutional, so not necessarily card-carrying loyalists to a particular party. And hence I said, the most stable coalition would have been, because look, the voters did not trust either the ANC and the DA, which I consider to be the biggest losers. They didn't trust them to govern outright. And so the mature thing would have been for the DA and the ANC to say, in the interest of the voters, let's deliver stable government and let's see if we can compromise and find common ground. That experiment didn't work, and now we've got the risk of minority governments being formed against the will of the people, I would say, to keep the ANC out. My enemy's enemy is my friend. It is that type of thinking that has entered into our